The soft chime of the jewelry store doorbell echoed through the quiet, elegant boutique as a little girl stepped inside, her curious eyes scanning the glittering display cases. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her brown curls bouncing with each step. Clutching a small, worn-out teddy bear in one arm, she wandered toward the counter, where a sharply dressed man was examining a stunning diamond ring under the bright showroom lights. The man, Sebastian King, was a billionaire, known for his vast empire, a chain of luxury hotels and real estate ventures that spanned across continents. He was a man of few words, always exuding an air of authority and control. He didn't frequent places like this often, but today was different. This ring in his hands wasn't just any ring. It was an exact replica of one he had lost years ago, a ring that once belonged to someone he loved deeply. As he turned the ring under the light, lost in thought, the little girl standing beside him tilted her head, watching him closely. Her tiny voice broke the silence. "Hi, sir," she said politely. "My mother has a ring just like yours." Sebastian's fingers stiffened around the band. He turned his gaze toward the girl, his sharp blue eyes now filled with curiosity. His heart skipped a beat. "Your mother?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with something unreadable. The girl nodded eagerly. "Yes. It looks just like that. She always wears it. She says it's very special." Sebastian's grip on the ring tightened. His mind raced. There was no way. This ring, the original one, had been unique. One of a kind. The only person who ever had it was. He shook off the thought. Impossible. He had accepted the loss years ago, burying it along with the memories that still haunted him. And yet, something about this girl's innocent declaration sent a shiver down his spine. "What's your name?" he asked carefully. "Mia," she chirped, swinging her teddy bear back and forth. "I came here with my mom. She's over there." She pointed toward the back of the store, where a woman stood examining a display of necklaces. Sebastian's breath caught in his throat the moment he saw her. The world seemed to slow. The woman turned slightly, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and for a split second, Sebastian felt as if he was staring at a ghost. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs as recognition crashed over him like a tidal wave. It couldn't be. The woman who had disappeared from his life years ago. The woman he thought he'd never see again. And she was wearing that ring. Sebastian took a slow, deliberate step forward, his pulse hammering in his ears. His mind was screaming with questions, but none of them could form into words. Was it really her? How was this possible? And if it was her, why had she never come back? Before he could move any closer, Mia suddenly tugged at his sleeve. "Sir," she whispered, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Are you okay? You look like you saw a ghost." Sebastian inhaled sharply, forcing himself to regain his composure. He had to be sure. He had to know the truth. "Mia," he said slowly, his voice quieter now. "What's your mother's name?" The little girl smiled brightly. "Her name is Emily." The name struck him like lightning. Emily. The woman he had once loved. The woman who had vanished without a trace. And now, she was standing just a few feet away. His mind reeled with 1,000 questions, but only one mattered right now. If Emily was here, if she was really alive, then why had she never come back to him? Sebastian barely noticed when Mia let go of his sleeve and ran toward her mother. Emily turned at the sound of her daughter's voice, offering her a gentle smile. And then, her eyes met Sebastian's. Her expression froze. Her smile vanished. For a moment, neither of them moved. The weight of unspoken words, of lost years, of unanswered questions, hung between them like an invisible storm. Emily's fingers instinctively curled around the ring on her hand. Sebastian clenched his jaw. The past was no longer buried. It had just walked right back into his life. And this time, he wouldn't let it slip away so easily. Emily's breath caught in her throat as her eyes locked onto Sebastian's. It had been years. Years of silence. Years of wondering if she'd ever see him again. And now, here he was. standing just a few feet away, looking at her with a mixture of shock, anger, and something else she couldn't quite name. She felt Mia tug at her hand. "Mommy, look. That man has a ring like yours," the little girl chirped excitedly. Emily's fingers instinctively tightened around the ring on her hand, the very same ring that Sebastian had once placed on her finger so many years ago, promising her forever. A promise that had been shattered. Sebastian took a slow step forward, his eyes searching hers. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and unsteady. "Emily." He said her name almost like he was testing to see if saying it would make her disappear. Emily swallowed hard. She wanted to say something, anything, but her mind was spinning. She had spent so long preparing for the possibility of this moment, and yet, now that it was here, she had no idea what to do. Mia looked between them, her small face scrunching up in confusion. "Mommy, do you know him?" Sebastian let out a slow breath, his gaze flickering from Emily to Mia. The resemblance was undeniable. The shape of her eyes. The curve of her smile. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as realization crashed over him like a wave. "Mia," he said softly, his voice filled with something raw. "How old are you?" Emily's heart pounded. She could feel the walls closing in around her. "I'm 7. Mia answered proudly. "I'll be 8 soon." Sebastian inhaled sharply. The pieces clicked together in his mind. His head turned back to Emily, his expression shifting from shock to something far more intense. 7 years. Emily had been gone for 7 years. And this little girl, her little girl, was 7 years old. Sebastian's voice dropped lower, barely above a whisper. "Is she?" Emily's throat tightened. She knew what he was asking. She knew what he was thinking. "Sebastian, please," she murmured, her voice almost pleading. But it was too late. He already knew the answer. His world tilted on its axis as he stared at the little girl who had just unknowingly turned his life upside down. Mia was his daughter. A whirlwind of emotions crashed over him. Rage. Betrayal. Heartbreak. Why hadn't Emily told him? Why had she kept their daughter from him all these years? He had spent so long grieving her absence, believing she was gone forever. And all this time, she had been raising his child in secret. His voice was sharp when he spoke again. "You left without a word. I searched for you. I thought you were." He stopped himself. The memories were too painful to finish. "And now you just show up, like none of it ever happened?" Emily took a shaky breath, pulling Mia closer. "It wasn't that simple, Sebastian." "Then explain it to me," he demanded. "Explain why you disappeared. Explain why you never told me I had a daughter." Emily looked around, realizing they were attracting attention. People in the store were glancing in their direction, sensing the tension in the air. She swallowed hard and forced a small smile, for Mia's sake. "Mia, sweetheart," she said gently, "why don't you go look at the necklaces over there for a minute?" Mia hesitated. "But just for a minute, okay?" Emily said, brushing her hand through her daughter's curls. Reluctantly, Mia nodded and skipped off toward the glass cases, leaving her mother and Sebastian alone. Sebastian didn't wait a second longer. "Talk," he said, his voice a mix of hurt and frustration. "Tell me why you disappeared." Emily let out a slow, shaky breath. "Because I had no choice." His jaw tightened. "That's not good enough." Emily's hands trembled as she stared down at the ring on her finger, the weight of the past pressing down on her. "Sebastian, if I had stayed, you would have never forgiven me." She hesitated. "You would have hated me." "Hated you?" He looked at her like she had just said the most absurd thing in the world. "Emily, do you have any idea what it did to me when you vanished?" His voice was raw, filled with something deeper than anger. "Do you have any idea how many nights I spent wondering if you were even alive?" Tears pricked at her eyes. "I wanted to tell you. I wanted to. But She cut herself off, shaking her head. There were things you didn't know. Things I had to protect you from. Sebastian's patience was running thin. What things? Emily hesitated. Her gaze darted to Mia, who was still happily admiring the jewelry in the distance. She lowered her voice. Sebastian, it wasn't safe. I left because I had to. I did what I thought was best. His eyes darkened. Best for who? Because it sure as hell wasn't best for me. And it wasn't best for Mia, either. Emily flinched. I know. She took a shaky breath. And I've lived with that guilt every single day. But I was scared. I thought I was doing the right thing. Sebastian exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. The anger in his chest was warring with something deeper. Pain. Loss. Love. Even after all these years, even after everything, one truth remained. He had never stopped loving her. But love wasn't enough to erase the past. You should have told me, he said, his voice quieter now but still heavy with emotion. I had a right to know. Emily wiped at her eyes. I know. A long silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and broken memories. Then Mia's voice broke the tension. Mommy! Look at this one! She held up a small silver locket. Emily turned, forcing a smile. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Sebastian watched her, his heart aching with the weight of everything he had just learned. He had a daughter. A daughter who had lived 7 years without him. He wasn't sure what hurt more, the lost time, or the fear that he might never be able to get it back. One thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The car ride was silent. Emily sat in the passenger seat, staring out of the window, while Sebastian kept his hands firm on the steering wheel. Mia sat in the back, humming softly to herself as she clutched the small silver locket. She was completely unaware of the storm raging between the two adults in the front seats. Sebastian had insisted on driving them home. Emily hadn't argued. Not because she didn't want to, but because she was exhausted. Exhausted from the weight of the past. Exhausted from the emotions she had spent years trying to suppress. She could feel Sebastian's tension. He hadn't said much since they left the store, but she knew his mind was racing. Finally, he spoke. Where have you been all these years? His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Emily closed her eyes for a brief second before answering. A small town, about 3 hours from here. Sebastian gripped the wheel tighter. That close? His jaw clenched. You were that close to me this whole time? Emily nodded slowly. Yes. Sebastian let out a humorless chuckle. Unbelievable. Emily turned to look at him. Sebastian. 7 years, Emily. His voice was lower now, but no less intense. 7 years of thinking you were gone. 7 years of searching. And you were just 3 hours away? Emily looked down at her hands. I didn't want to leave. But you did. His tone was sharp. And you took my daughter with you. Emily flinched. She deserved that. She deserved all of it. I thought I was protecting her. Sebastian's hands tightened around the wheel. From what? Emily hesitated. She had always known this conversation would happen one day. But now that it was here, she was terrified. She turned to look at the back seat. Mia had fallen asleep, her small body curled up against the window. Emily sighed, shifting in her seat. Sebastian, there were things going on back then. Things I couldn't tell you. Sebastian's knuckles turned white against the leather steering wheel. Then tell me now. Emily exhaled slowly. She turned back toward the window, watching the city lights blur past. Do you remember my father? Sebastian frowned. Of course, I do. He hated me. Emily let out a weak laugh. He hated anyone who didn't follow his rules. Sebastian glanced at her, his expression unreadable. What does he have to do with this? Emily's fingers curled into the fabric of her dress. He found out I was pregnant. Sebastian's entire body tensed. He didn't say anything. He just stared at the road ahead, his jaw locked. Emily swallowed hard. He wanted me to get rid of her. Sebastian's hands clenched into fists. His breathing was steady, but just barely. And when I refused, Emily continued, he threatened me. Sebastian's eyes darkened. Threatened you how? Emily's throat felt tight. He said if I didn't leave you, if I didn't disappear, he would ruin you. Sebastian let out a sharp breath through his nose. Ruin me? Emily nodded. He had enough power to do it, Sebastian. He knew things about your company, about your business deals. He told me he'd make sure you lost everything. Sebastian shook his head. You should have told me. I couldn't. Emily's voice cracked. He wasn't bluffing, Sebastian. He was dangerous. Sebastian's grip on the wheel was so tight, his knuckles had turned white. So, you just left? Emily's eyes filled with unshed tears. I thought I was doing what was best. Sebastian exhaled, shaking his head. His voice was lower now. You didn't trust me enough to fight for us? Emily wiped at her eyes. I did trust you. She let out a shaky breath. I just didn't trust my father not to destroy you. Sebastian didn't say anything for a long time. The car was silent again. Only the sound of Mia's soft breathing filled the space between them. Finally, Sebastian spoke. His voice was quieter now. Is he still a threat? Emily hesitated. Then she shook her head. No. He died 2 years ago. Sebastian inhaled deeply, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Then he turned his gaze toward her. And yet, you still didn't come back. Emily felt her chest tighten. I was scared, Sebastian. I didn't know if you'd even want me back after everything. Sebastian studied her for a long moment. Then, he turned his focus back to the road. I wanted you back every single day. Emily's heart clenched. She had expected anger. She had expected resentment. But she hadn't expected that. Sebastian pulled the car into a quiet street, stopping in front of a small house. Emily exhaled slowly. This is us. Sebastian stared at the modest home. It was nothing like the luxury penthouses and estates he was used to. It was small. Simple. But cozy. Mia stirred in the back seat, rubbing her eyes as she woke up. She let out a sleepy yawn. Are we home? Emily turned around, smiling softly. Yes, baby. Mia blinked up at Sebastian. Then, she smiled. Are you coming inside? Sebastian hesitated. Emily turned toward him, waiting for his answer. There was so much still left unsaid. So many wounds that hadn't yet healed. But this moment right here was the beginning of something new. Sebastian glanced at Emily. Then at Mia. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. He let out a slow breath. Then, he reached for the door handle. Yeah, he said quietly. I think I will. Sebastian couldn't tear his eyes away from Mia. His daughter. The realization still felt unreal, like a dream he had no control over. But the longer he stood there, watching her hold up the silver locket with pure excitement, the more it sank in. He had missed everything. Her first steps. Her first words. Her birthdays. 7 years of moments that he would never get back. His chest tightened with a mixture of anger and sadness. He had so many questions. But only one truly mattered now. What happens next? Sebastian turned back to Emily. His voice was quieter this time, but no less intense. What now, Emily? Emily hesitated. I don't know. She swallowed hard. I never thought this day would come. Sebastian exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Do you plan to disappear again? Her answer was immediate. No. Firm. Certain. I would never take her away from you again. He studied her carefully, searching for hesitation. But there was none. For the first time since this conversation began, he saw the weight of regret in her eyes. She meant it. Mia skipped back over to them, completely unaware of the storm of emotions between the two adults. She held up the locket with a bright smile. Mommy, can I have this one? Emily nodded, forcing a smile. Of course, sweetheart. Sebastian reached for his wallet. Let me. His voice was steady. Emily hesitated. But before she could protest, Sebastian had already handed his card to the cashier. Mia beamed up at him. Thank you, mister. His heart clenched. You can call me Sebastian. His voice faltered for a moment. Or. He swallowed hard. Whatever you want. Mia tilted her head in thought. Sebastian is a long name, she said playfully. Do you have a nickname? Sebastian's breath caught. He had never imagined this moment. The thought of her calling him Dad. It was almost too much to hope for. Emily touched Mia's shoulder gently. Sweetheart, why don't you thank him properly? Mia turned back to Sebastian, her big, curious eyes studying his face. Then, to his surprise, she wrapped her small arms around his waist in a quick hug. Thank you, she said softly. Sebastian froze. He had closed billion-dollar deals, built an empire from the ground up, faced ruthless competitors. But nothing had ever shaken him like this tiny embrace. A lump rose in his throat as he placed a hand on her back, holding her just for a second longer. Emily watched the moment unfold, her heart aching. She had feared this for years. Feared that Sebastian would never forgive her. Feared that he would hate her for what she had done. But now, seeing the way he held Mia, the way his entire world seemed to shift in that single moment, she knew she had made the right choice in finally telling the truth. As Mia pulled away, she grinned up at him. Maybe I'll think of a nickname for you later. She giggled. Sebastian chuckled, his heart feeling lighter than it had in years. I'd like that. Emily met his gaze. Something unspoken passed between them. A promise. It wasn't going to be easy. There was still so much to talk about. So much to heal. But one thing was certain. This time, they wouldn't be strangers. Sebastian had found what he didn't even know he was missing. And he wasn't going to let it go. The days that followed were different. Sebastian kept showing up. Not just for Emily, but for Mia. He took her to the park. Helped her with homework. Learned her favorite songs. And Mia. She adored him. Every morning, she would ask if he was coming back. And every evening, he would prove that he always would. Emily watched it all happen with a cautious heart. Sebastian was serious. He wasn't just making promises, he was keeping them. And that terrified her. Because if she let herself believe this was real, then losing him again would hurt even more. One evening, Sebastian showed up with a small wrapped box. Mia gasped in excitement. A present? Sebastian smirked. Open it. Mia tore the wrapping off, her eyes widening as she pulled out a beautiful charm bracelet. Tiny silver charms dangled from it, a book, a heart, a puzzle piece. Mia beamed. It's so pretty. Sebastian crouched in front of her. Each charm means something special. The book, because you love stories. The heart, because you have the biggest one I've ever known. And the puzzle piece. Mia giggled. Because I'm the puzzle queen. Sebastian chuckled. Exactly. Mia threw her arms around his neck. Thank you, Sebastian. Sebastian held her close, his throat tightening. Emily stood nearby, watching the moment unfold. Her heart ached. She wanted to believe in this. In him. And maybe she was starting to. That night, after Mia was asleep, Sebastian and Emily sat outside on the porch. A warm breeze drifted through the air. Sebastian leaned back against the railing, his gaze on the stars. She's incredible. Emily smiled softly. Yeah. She is. Sebastian turned to look at her. I want to be here for her, Emily. Always. Emily swallowed hard. I know. Sebastian hesitated before speaking again. And I want to be here for you. Emily's breath caught. Sebastian reached for her hand. We don't have to rush anything. But I'm not going to pretend I don't love you. Emily's fingers trembled in his. She looked at him, the man she had spent years missing. The man she had never stopped loving. And for the first time, she let herself believe in the possibility of them again. She squeezed his hand. And in that quiet moment, the past didn't matter. The future was uncertain. But right now, they were together. And that was enough. Days turned into weeks. Sebastian became a constant presence in their lives. He picked Mia up from school. He stayed for dinner. He read her bedtime stories. And with every passing day, Emily felt her walls begin to crumble. She had spent years keeping her heart guarded. But Sebastian was breaking through piece by piece. And that terrified her. Because if this wasn't real, if he left again, she didn't think she could survive it. One evening, Mia sat on the couch, flipping through an old photo album. Sebastian sat beside her, watching as she pointed at the pictures. This is me when I was a baby. Sebastian chuckled. You were adorable. Mia giggled. Then, she hesitated. Her small fingers traced over a picture of Emily holding her as a newborn. Her voice was quieter when she spoke next. I wish you were in these pictures too. Sebastian's chest tightened. He swallowed hard. Me too, sweetheart. Mia looked up at him. But we can take new ones now, right? Sebastian's heart clenched. Slowly, he smiled. Yeah. We can. Emily, who had been listening from the doorway, felt tears sting her eyes. Mia had accepted him so easily. So fully. And Emily knew deep down she was doing the same. One night, after Mia had fallen asleep, Emily and Sebastian sat in the dimly lit living room. The air between them was heavy. Sebastian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Emily. His voice was low, steady. Emily looked at him, waiting. Sebastian exhaled. I want us to be a family. Emily's heart pounded. She had known this moment was coming. But hearing him say it made it real. Sebastian, she started, unsure of how to respond. He shook his head. I know you're scared. I know I hurt you. He reached for her hand. But I love you. I love Mia. And I'm not going anywhere. Emily swallowed hard. She wanted to believe him. And maybe she did. Slowly, she laced her fingers with his. Sebastian's breath hitched. Emily looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. Okay. Sebastian frowned slightly. Okay? Emily smiled softly. Okay. Let's try. Sebastian exhaled, relief washing over him. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles. Emily closed her eyes, letting herself feel it. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. To believe. And in that moment, she knew. This wasn't just the beginning of something new. It was the beginning of something real. Something lasting. A family. Sebastian kept his promise. He didn't rush her. He didn't push. He simply stayed. And little by little, Emily let herself believe. They spent evenings together, laughing over dinner. Sebastian helped Mia with her homework, teaching her little tricks to solve math problems faster. He even let Mia paint his nails one afternoon, much to her delight. Emily had never seen him like this. Relaxed. Happy. Like he finally belonged somewhere. And maybe he did. One afternoon, Sebastian picked Mia up from school. She skipped to the car, grinning as she buckled her seatbelt. Guess what? Sebastian smirked. What? Mia beamed. There's a father-daughter dance next week. Sebastian froze. Mia tilted her head. Will you come with me? Sebastian felt something in his chest tighten. He swallowed, glancing at her hopeful eyes. Then, he smiled. Of course, I will. Mia squealed in excitement. Yay! We have to practice dancing. Sebastian chuckled. Deal. But as he drove home, something lingered in his mind. Father-daughter dance. It was the first time he had ever been invited to something like that. And for the first time, he truly felt like a father. That evening, Mia ran to Emily, excitement bubbling from her. Mommy! Sebastian is taking me to the dance. Emily's heart swelled. She turned to Sebastian, who leaned against the counter, watching them with a small smile. Emily's eyes softened. That means a lot to her. Sebastian nodded. It means a lot to me, too. Emily exhaled. She wasn't sure when it had happened. When she had stopped waiting for him to leave, and started believing that he was here to stay. But she wasn't scared anymore. Not of him. Not of this. She smiled. You're going to be a great dad, Sebastian. Sebastian's breath caught. He had never needed to hear something so badly. His voice was rough when he answered. I already have the perfect daughter. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. Mia giggled, wrapping her arms around Sebastian's waist. And as Emily watched them, she knew. They were already a family. They always had been. And now. They always would be the night of the dance arrived. Mia twirled in front of the mirror, admiring her dress, a soft blue with sparkles that shimmered under the light. Emily knelt beside her, fixing a small tiara in her curls. You look beautiful, sweetheart. Mia grinned. Like a princess? Emily smiled. Exactly like a princess. A knock at the door made them both turn. Emily stood, smoothing out her dress as she went to open it. When she did, her breath caught. Sebastian stood in the doorway, dressed in a tailored black suit. He held a small corsage in his hand, his blue eyes soft as they met hers. Wow, he murmured. You both look incredible. Emily swallowed. She had seen him in expensive suits before. But tonight, standing here like this. He wasn't the billionaire she once knew. He was just a father. A man trying his best. And she had never loved him more. Mia ran up, bouncing with excitement. Do you like my dress? Sebastian crouched, carefully slipping the corsage onto her tiny wrist. You look like a real princess. Mia giggled. Sebastian stood, glancing at Emily. Ready? Emily nodded, pressing a kiss to Mia's forehead. Have fun, baby. Mia took Sebastian's hand, practically skipping as they left. Emily watched them go, her heart full. This was real. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. At the dance, Mia pulled Sebastian onto the dance floor. She giggled as she placed his hands on her small shoulders. You have to twirl me. Sebastian smirked. Like this? He lifted her slightly, spinning her in a slow twirl. Mia laughed, her eyes shining. Sebastian's heart clenched. This little girl. His daughter. She had already changed his entire world. And he wouldn't trade it for anything. Not for money. Not for power. Not for the life he once thought he wanted. This right here was everything. Mia tugged at his sleeve. Sebastian? He looked down. Mia hesitated before smiling softly. Can I call you Dad? Sebastian's breath hitched. The music faded. The entire world disappeared. He swallowed hard. Then, his voice was rough but full of love. I'd like that. Mia beamed. Okay, Dad. Sebastian closed his eyes for a brief second, holding on to the moment. He had gained everything he never knew he needed. And he wasn't going to let it go. Not ever. The dance ended, but something had changed. Sebastian wasn't just a visitor in Mia's life anymore. He was her father. And she had made it official in the simplest, most beautiful way, by calling him Dad. As they drove home, Mia was still buzzing with excitement. That was the best night ever. Sebastian chuckled. Yeah? Think we should do it again next year? Mia gasped. Yes. But you have to practice dancing more. Sebastian smirked. Was I that bad? Mia giggled. A little. Sebastian shook his head, pretending to be offended. All right, next time, I'll be the best dancer there. Mia nodded. Deal. Emily was waiting by the door when they arrived home. Mia ran to her, wrapping her arms around her waist. Mommy, it was amazing. And guess what? Emily brushed Mia's curls back. What, sweetheart? Mia grinned. I called him Dad. Emily's breath caught. She looked at Sebastian, her heart clenching at the emotion in his eyes. Sebastian exhaled slowly, nodding once. Emily swallowed, pulling Mia closer. That's wonderful, baby. Mia yawned, suddenly looking sleepy. Emily smiled. Come on, let's get you to bed. She led Mia to her room, leaving Sebastian standing in the doorway, still feeling the weight of everything that had happened. A few minutes later, Emily stepped back into the living room. Sebastian was standing near the window, staring out at the night sky. She approached quietly, stopping beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, softly, Emily said, That meant everything to you, didn't it? Sebastian swallowed hard. More than you'll ever know. Emily hesitated. Then, she reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. Sebastian turned to her. Emily's voice was quiet, but steady. You belong here, Sebastian. Sebastian's breath caught. Emily squeezed his hand. With us. Sebastian exhaled, his heart pounding. He lifted his free hand, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I love you, Emily. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. She had spent so long fighting her feelings. So long believing this could never happen. But now. She knew the truth. She had never stopped loving him. And she never would. Her voice was barely a whisper when she finally said, I love you too. Sebastian let out a shaky breath, his forehead resting against hers. For the first time in years. Everything felt right. They had found their way back to each other. Not just for themselves. But for Mia. For their family. And this time. They were never letting go. The end.